I think we're just going to get started with the Parsha component. Sorry to come on late, everybody. I had some computer difficulties. We're going to begin with chapter 14, verse 1. Chapter 14, verse 1. We were discussing yesterday in this pasuk, the Torah says, your children to Hashem, don't place marks upon your body if someone passes away. And we were trying to understand what the correlation is between that prohibition and the preface of being children to Hashem. So Rashi says the pshat is you should look a certain way. You're a dignified nation. You have a special role in the world. You should look a certain way. The Ibn Ezra says the pshat is there's never such a tragedy in someone passing away, because even if a very beloved relative passes away, you still have your Father in heaven. You still have God. Just to close this out, the Ramban, it's the Ramban on Pasuk Aleph. It's about the last 8 lines or so in the Ramban on Pasuk Aleph. Ulefi dati, my view is, Kitam am kadosh havtacha b'kiyum hanefashos lefanav yisparach. The reason it says in the next pasuk, you're a holy nation to Hashem, is it's an assurance that the souls will continue to exist before God. Yomar me'achrei she'ata am kadosh skulas Hashem. Since you are a holy nation and God's special people, God will never completely push people away. Even if, heaven forbid, a person passes away at a relatively young age, it's not the ultimate tragedy. And says the Ramban, the reason it's not the ultimate tragedy is because their soul will endure. Their soul will continue to exist. And sort of brings to mind, I believe the origin is a mashal, a parable in the famous Sefer Gesher HaChaim. But there's this very famous, I think it's a Journey song, I'm sure many of you have heard it, the discussions from the womb. You know, these two fetuses in a womb, and all of a sudden one of the fetuses is gone, and it's this terrible thing. And my dear brother, what happened to you? Where you've left this world? And then the second fetus realizes a moment later that the first brother had been born into the world, and now he follows. And so that's a mashal that we're so upset when a person leaves our world, they're going on to another world. So the Ramban says that's the pshat. Because you're a holy nation to God, because God will always mind your neshamos, mind your souls, don't be too distraught when a person passes away, because they live on. It's just in a different realm. Now, I must say, this is a very powerful idea, a very nice idea. It's very easy for us to talk Jewish philosophy. That doesn't mean that a person loses a loved one, they shouldn't be sad and distraught. Of course they should, and that's a very real emotion. But the Ramban is saying that what the Torah is teaching us, by in some way tempering it, when you think about it, what we do, I mentioned yesterday, we do something, lo aleinu, we rip clothing, but the statement with ripping clothing is an expression of pain. The statement with marking oneself seems to be that this is an eternal, loss. And for that, the Ramban says that's not true. Now, even the Ramban says, the Torah doesn't prohibit crying. In other words, based on the Ramban's logic, it might be that you're not allowed to cry at a funeral, because what do you mean? Don't you believe the person goes out to another world? Because guess what? Human nature is that when there are people that we love, if we're separated from them, even if they're still alive, if we're separated from them, a farewell, human emotion makes us upset. So, but the Ramban says, so we recognize that, the Torah recognizes that, but this act of marking one's own body, that's where the Torah draws the line. We can't semech l'Rabboseinu zal b'asram l's'abel al nefesh yoser midai. It's a very interesting halacha. The Gemara says that the rabbis prohibited excessive mourning on one's loss. And of course, the question is, what does excessive mourning mean? But the Ramban says this is the point. The point is because we recognize the person goes on to another realm. It's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's jump ahead now to verse 21. Verse 21. Lo sochlu chol nevela. Do not eat, just as an aside, it's always good to know, One of the most misused words in Jewish halachic life is treif. Treifa is a very technical term for an animal that dies by an injury, or that was suffering from a life-threatening injury when it died. So literally an animal was torn in the field, or an animal had some internal illness or something like that. So the halacha is such an animal is not kosher. Generally speaking, when we talk about going to Safeway and the animal that's treif meat, it's not really treif. What generally speaking it is it's an avela. Obviously, sometimes the species is not kosher in the first place, but if it's from a kosher species, the problem with eating it is it's an avela. An avela is an animal that died not through halacha shechita. So don't eat an animal that died without shechita. La gera she b'sharecha titnena v'achala. Give it to the non-Jew in your midst. Also, just so people are not confused, the term ger means different things in different contexts in the Torah. Of course, we're familiar with ger being a convert. A convert to Judaism would rightfully be offended if you handed them non-kosher meat. That's not what the Torah is recommending here. The term ger here in this pasuk means what's called a ger toshav, a non-Jew who lives among the Jews who accepts the Noachite laws. So they're not going to worship avodah zarah. They recognize the oneness of God. They're going to live an ethical life, and so on and so forth. But they don't have to keep kosher. So we look out for those people. We want to partner with those people. So if you come across meat, maybe the shechita got messed up or something like that, so you're not allowed to eat the meat, but give it as a gift to your non-Jewish neighbor who keeps the Noachite laws. Or you could sell it to a non-Jew. By the way, just as an aside, so this means that non-kosher meat is permissible to derive benefit from it. It's interesting. There is a rabbinic prohibition on making a business off of non-kosher meat. It's halach and shulchan aruch that a person is not supposed to be selling non-kosher meat as a business. But we're not talking about this as a business. We're talking about a person came across meat that is not kosher to eat. So they could give it as a gift to a non-Jew. They could sell it to a non-Jew. Why? Why should you do this? Because you're a holy nation to Hashem your God. That's not that different than the pasuk we saw. The last pasuk we're looking at the beginning of the chapter. So don't eat non-kosher because you're a holy nation. We could have said that for every mitzvah in the Torah, you're a holy nation. Why is it saying here? What's the point? You're a holy nation. And then we end off, do not cook the goat in its mother's, do not cook the kid in its mother's milk. This, of course, could be literally understood as being a very specific prohibition. We don't understand it this way. This is one of the three places in the Torah where it prohibits, the way we understand it is basar b'chalav. I should clarify that the Torah's prohibition of meat and milk is when meat and milk are cooked together. It's just good to recognize that that's actually the Torah prohibition. We learn from the fact that it says it 3 times that there's a prohibition to cook meat and milk together. There's a prohibition to eat meat and milk which were cooked together. And there's a prohibition to benefit from meat and milk which were cooked together. So ironically, meat that's totally not kosher, I'm allowed to sell to a non-Jew, no problem. But kosher meat that was cooked together with kosher milk, I'm not allowed to sell to a non-Jew because that would be to derive benefit from it. But what I'd really like to focus on is why does it say specifically in this pasuk, you are a holy nation to Hashem? Sure we are, but why specifically here? Let's see Rashi on pasuk Chafalef. It's the second Rashi on the pasuk. Kiam kadosh atol Hashem, kadesh et atzmecha b'mutar lecha. Sanctify yourself with things permitted to you. Tvarim hamutarim v'acherim noagim b'eser. An interesting thing. So Rashi says this pasuk is a layer on top of everything we're talking about. If meat is non-kosher, you can't eat it. If kosher meat is cooked with milk, you can't eat it. And by the way, there are other things that you are allowed to eat. But if you're in the presence of someone who, for whatever reason, doesn't eat it, maybe it's some stringency the person has, be sensitive. Don't eat it in the person's presence if it's something that they, for whatever reason, are not allowed to eat. So according to Rashi, this is creating another category of things that are not appropriate for us to eat. Interesting thing. Let's go on to the Ramban on Pasuk Chafalef. The tam kiam kadosh atol Hashem elokecha, the meaning of you are a holy nation to Hashem your God. Davek im los vashel gedi b'chalevimo. Says the Ramban, the meaning of this phrase, the significance of it, is not for the preceding phrase in the pasuk, it's for the following phrase in the pasuk. We're it's an introduction to don't cook the kid in its mother's milk, meaning ki einenu ma'achol nisav avol yeser so liyoseinu kedoshim b'ma'acholim o liyoseinu kedoshim shel nia amachzori lo yirachamenu shenachlov es ha'ein v'notzei menu acholav shenvashel bo habein. Ramban says, when you look at the prohibition of cooking meat and milk, it's so difficult to understand. Why can't I cook meat and milk? Both of these foods are kosher. It seems to be totally illogical. So to that, Hashem says, you know what? You are living by a very unique set of rules. You are this nation of remarkable sanctity, and it's hard to understand sometimes all the different sacred laws governing you. But you have to live by it. Whether because this is just what God said, whether because the specific idea of killing a mother and then taking taking a mother's milk and then using the mother's milk to kill and cook the child is just a lack of compassion. So Ramban says maybe the reason why it says you're a holy nation is because you have to live with greater compassion than that. What do you mean? I just gave you the speech before that this is not only about a kid and its mother's milk. This is about all meat and milk. That's not, you go to the store, you buy the meat from Bessie the cow, and then you buy the milk from Henrietta the cow. They never met. There's no relationship between them. Why is that? I can't cook them together. Why is that a lack of compassion? But the bottom line is the fact that we give this as an example, at least part of the example seems to fit into mercy. That's what the Ramban says. And finally, let's see the Sforno. Sforno on Pasuk Chaf Aleph. It's the second Sforno on the Pasuk. Kiam kadosh atol Hashem Elokecha. You're a holy nation to Hashem, your God. Afal pi shanvela hina osa lumazon enoshi kamo lagier olanachri. It's a little bit bizarre. So Rashi said this phrase is its own discussion. The Ramban says this phrase is for the following phrase. The Sforno says this phrase is on the preceding phrase. There's this meat. It wasn't shechted. Is there something fundamentally unethical about using this meat? No. You tell me I could sell it to my non-Jewish neighbor. You tell me I could give it to my non-Jewish neighbor. So obviously it's not so bad. And yet, Einana Osel Mazon Am Kadosh. But for me, it's not appropriate to eat. Why is that different? Says the Sforno, because you're holy. Your hope is to live up to this remarkable completeness that God lays out the path for you how to do it. You're living by different rules. So those are three different approaches on why it says here you're a holy nation. So we discussed the Ramban's pshat in why it prefaces the prohibition of marking oneself with the statement that you're children. And we discussed Rashi, the Ramban and Sforno, regarding why it says you're a holy nation in the context of non-kosher meat. Okay.